But, yeah, on to the most polarizing in this series in general, honestly, let's be real. Skyward Sword.
Skyward Sword.
Okay, before we go into depth here, I think it's in the best interests of both us and the people watching that we establish before going into this how we feel about this game. Because this game in general is so polarizing that whether we say something negative about one dungeon or whether we say something positive about another, that almost doesn't matter if people don't know how we feel about the game as a whole. Because this game as a whole it has such strong things both for and against it.
I would describe Skyward Sword as very much a game of highs and lows.
I agree. It has its moments.
When it gets low, but when it does something right, it does it very right.
Yeah, like, we're talking like Twilight Princess Dungeons level of right. What it does good, it does amazingly well. And I really don't... It's not that I don't want to portray the idea that I don't like Skyward Sword, because that's not true. I love this game. I really do.
I like Skyward Sword too.
It really... This was the Zelda game that was new and big when I was getting into the series. So it holds a very special place in my heart as the first big Zelda game that I was like... I don't want to say it's the first one I was looking forward to, because I got into the series like right when it came out, not before. So it's not that I was looking forward to it, but it was the big new thing when I was like at my peak of interest in Zelda. And for that, it's always going to have a special place to me. But it does have its issues. However, as you'll see, the dungeons overall are pretty freaking good.
That's pretty much how I feel too.
And let's start off with, honestly, what I consider to be on the lower end of the spectrum, Skyview Temple. Honestly, B?
B.
It's a good first dungeon. It's not as good a first dungeon as Twilight Princess's Forest Temple, but it's good. It's really good. It's got a really unique item. It's got a clever layout. The theming really isn't anything all that special, but the atmosphere is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Like, it feels like... It's not that it feels unnatural, but it feels like an abandoned shrine, kind of. And that's fitting. I like it for that.
I think it's really cool how nature is sort of taken over this ancient place.
Yeah.
It looks really good.
That's exactly what I was trying to say, and I couldn't really find the words for it, but you're right. Like, this feels like an ancient relic that has been left long ago and overtaken by nature. It feels like ruins without really feeling like ruins. It feels more like an abandoned place of worship. And it's kind of like the opposite end of something like Temple of Time that has remained untouched for so long that it's basically immaculate. It's the opposite. It's like dilapidated because nature was allowed to grow wild in this place.
To be fair, the Temple of Time kind of exists in some weird alternate dimension in Twilight Princess, so...
Yeah, exactly, and this place is literally just on the ground where nobody has been in hundreds of years. So, like... obviously this is gonna happen over time.
Yeah.
And the looks of this place, like the set pieces, they give off that vibe pretty dang well. Mm-hmm. Again, I really like the item here. Even though I do think it's not put to that great use in here, because the beetle is a great item that is kind of useless until you get to Lenairu, and then it becomes really cool. Because as soon as you can pick things up with it, it becomes like 10 times more interesting. Before that, you don't really use it for all that much. Including in here. You use it sometimes in here, but not a lot. And also, this is a personal gripe, but longtime viewers of my channel will know that I'm not the biggest fan of the first fight with Girahim. I don't think it's as awful. I would not rank it as highly on that video as I did if I remade that list now. That being said, I still don't particularly like it, mostly just because I feel like sometimes it just doesn't work. The controls in Skyward Sword, I will pretty much defend until the end of time. I really like the swordplay in this game.
Yeah.
There are 2 exceptions to this, and both of them are boss fights. They are the fight with Girahim and the fight with the Imprisoned. And both of them are for pretty much the same reason, because swinging upward it feels awkward and really, like, imprecise. Something about it just feels, like, uncomfortable.
Wait, when do you have to swing upward?
If he grabs your sword.
Oh, right.
And while I'm on that topic, sometimes he just grabs it anyway. Like, I swear, I know what you're supposed to do is, like, guide his hand over to one side and then slash from the other direction so that he can't catch it. And I swear, sometimes he just grabs it anyway. It just feels very finicky, and it's not consistent. It's not that it's inconsistent, because, like, it works a good amount of the time, but, like, a solid 25% of the time, he just grabs your sword, regardless of what you do. From my experience, at least. I don't know if I just got really unlucky or what, but it's consistently done that for me. As soon as he pulls out a sword and stops grabbing it, the fight stops being irritating to me. I like it from that point onward, and I like the idea of fighting essentially the main villain of the game as the first boss. That's a really neat idea. It's just that first phase just sometimes doesn't function, and it's a little bit irritating. But other than that, Skyview Temple is just kind of decent-ish first dungeon. It's got some cool ideas that other first dungeons don't have, but aside from that, it's just kind of there.
The aesthetic is nice, the item is really cool, and the boss fight, when it works, is really cool.
When it works, it's good. I will concede on that much. I love the idea of fighting Girahim as the first boss. And
personally, I didn't have any technical issues fighting Girahim.
I also just don't like I think the reason that I dislike that fight so much is because the first time I played the game, and I'm not the only person who experienced this, I watched my cousin play it for the first time too, and he said the same thing. Where, like, your first thought is to, like, oh, you see him following the sword, maybe I have to, like, misdirect him somehow. And then if you do it, and then he grabs it on the first time, naturally, the player is going to think, oh, that must not be the way you're supposed to do this. Let me try something else.
Yeah, that would be kind of
So, if that happens the first time you try that, which, for me, it did, it makes figuring out that is what you're supposed to do kind of like a slap in the face, because you're like, I did that, and it didn't work. And again, I know I'm not the only person that's happened to. I watched my cousin Jesse, who's the person who got me into Zelda to begin with. I watched him play this game blind, that boss fight specifically, and he said the exact same thing. Like, I didn't tell him what to do, nothing. He just like, oh, I think I understand this, and he tried to swipe him, and he's like, what? You grabbed my sword? Alright, maybe I have to use the beetle somehow. And then he spent like 15 minutes trying other random shit. Before I just told him, yeah, that is what you're supposed to do. It just didn't work.
Actually, I do think that's really interesting how he's one of the only dungeon bosses to not use the item you got from the dungeon to defeat him.
I have mixed feelings about that, because on one hand, I would really want to see how the beetle would be used, and on the other hand, I don't really see how it can. It's just so slow.
Maybe stun the boss and then use the hook beetle to grab a bomb from somewhere else.
You don't have the hook beetle.
I mean, like, later in the game.
We'll get to that in a bit, because I have some choice words about that.
Oh.
But anyway, yeah, that pretty much covers Skyview. It's got some cool ideas. It's not that they're handled badly, but they could have used a bit more polish, I think is the best way I can explain it.
And also, your experience may vary.
Yeah. Again, it's like, If the Girahim fight worked correctly the first time, I would not blame you if it was one of your favorite bosses in the series. Because it's really cool. It's just that if it doesn't work and you don't know why it's not working, it's really irritating.
Yeah.
And then when you figure out that you were doing it right and it just wasn't functioning correctly, I don't want to say it's insulting, that's kind of putting it too strongly, but it doesn't feel good. Let's just put it that way. It kind of feels like, it's one of those, oh, that's dumb moments. But anyway, that brings us to the Earth Temple.
Hey!
Honestly, another B for me.
B.
It's weird. Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess kind of have the same thing where they start out good, and then as the game progresses, the dungeons elevate to a new height that the beginning of the game can't even hope to match. So, the Earth Temple is not bad by any means. There's really nothing wrong with it. But compared to what happens next, you're probably gonna forget about this place pretty quick.
Yeah.
So, I will say I do like the ball rolling thing, though. That's cool.
I was about to say that. That's the only thing I really remember about the Earth Temple.
That's my biggest problem with this place, is that, like, aside from the ball rolling place, it's really not that memorable.
Yeah.
There's nothing that really stands out about it. It just kind of exists.
Yeah.
Where even in other dungeons, that don't really have a lot of big, like, wow moments, like, there's always usually something. There's, like, the Deku Tree has, like, that big spiderweb thing where you drop down in the big main room. The Dodongo's Cavern has, like, the bombs dropping into his eyes. For Skyview Temple, this one probably varies, but for most people, it's probably the Girahim fight, but for me, it was the eye thing. You know what I'm talking about, right? There's, like, an eye above a door, and you have to, like, make it dizzy.
Oh, yeah.
But, like, for me, that was, like, the big clever moment in that dungeon. But, like, the Earth Temple in Skyward Sword doesn't really have that. The ball rolling thing is the closest you really get to it.
Yeah.
But, again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a decent dungeon. So, that's pretty much all I got to say there. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Not really.
The Earth Temple has the unfortunate circumstance of being the most unmemorable dungeon in Skyward Sword.
Yeah, Earth Temple is one of...
It's very forgettable.
Yeah, it's not one that I really dread getting to, but not one that I really get excited for.
Yeah.
And that's kind of Elden in general for me from Skyward.
And again, I have some words to say about that, and we'll get to that later. But for now, we have A, possibly S. The Lenairu mining facility is a cool dungeon.
Yes, it is.
I'm tempted to say this is... I don't know whether to put this in A or S, because here's the thing. While I love the shit out of this dungeon, there are dungeons in Skyward Sword that we're going to talk about later that they do things that amaze me just as much and more. So
Yeah,
I kind of want to put this in A solely for the fact that I can put the next ones above it.
That's pretty much what I was thinking.
Because, like, this is a really cool dungeon, and I really don't want to understate this. If there was a tier above S, this would be in S. But for now, A is a good spot, because this is a really clever dungeon. Time shift stones are one of the coolest ideas the Zelda series has ever had.
Yes.
That is such a clever dungeon mechanic. Not just a dungeon mechanic, but like Lenairu in general. And they're put to such good use here.
Yes. Yes. The time shift stones. That is what makes this dungeon and Lenairu in general so good.
And that's part of why I want to say it's S, but the reason I'm holding off on that is because, and anybody who's played the game knows exactly where I'm going with this, another dungeon does it again and does it better. Like, this is one of those moments that you don't think can be topped until the game does it. And oh boy, does it do it. Because this is such a cool idea, and it's one of those, how could they ever improve on this? And then somehow they do. Also, I just
realized something.
What?
This game broke third dungeon syndrome.
It did. It really did. Yeah, because, I don't know what it is about third dungeons in Zelda games, and this has been consistent even in some of the 2D games. The third ones are either not memorable, or just, like, the weakest in a collection of good.
Yeah.
And this is the first one that's actually, like, truly incredible. Because not only is it, like, a really good dungeon, it's the best dungeon in the game up until this point. Like, it is a step above the first two by a significant amount. And this is actually a really cool touch that I honestly don't think I would have noticed had I not owned a player's guide for this game. But, did you know... Well, I mean, once you know this, it's kind of like, oh, now it's obvious, but the boss of this dungeon is hinted at throughout the entire thing.
Is it?
Yes. You remember what you've been fighting for the entire dungeon? Tiny little scorpions. Moldarak is an adult form of one of those.
Oh.
And again, I don't think I would have pieced this together if I didn't have a player's guide, but I did, and like the opening line of the player's guide is just like, remember those little arachnid things that you've been fighting off this entire time? This is what happens if you let one grow for 1,000 years.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, they're the same thing. Their little ones are little baby Moldaraks. That's also why there's more than one of them. Because you fight Moldarak again when you're like on the sand sea thing. That's why. Because those little scorpion things are everywhere, and if you let them grow up, that's what they become. It's not a unique creature.
I never noticed that.
It's one of those things that it's so obvious once you know it, but like you never think about that until somebody points it out. And it's just a really cool little detail.
I think one other thing that kind of does hold Lenairu mining facility back for me is a couple of rooms that are a little annoying.
Which ones? It's been a while since I played Skyward Sword, so refresh my memory.
The one where you're in this big open room with a huge pit and you have these flying enemies that you have to shoot that burst into a ton of rupees.
Oh god, I can't tell you how annoyed I am every time a friggin' giant rupee falls into a pit of nothing.
Yes, that always makes me feel bad.
They knew what they were doing. They knew. They had to have known.
And the other thing is that room, the one with all the sand that you have to blow away?
Which one? There's several from what I remember.
The big one.
Oh, the big... Okay, I know which one you're talking about now.
Yes. And you feel compelled to blow all of it.
The OCD in me will not let me leave that room unless I get rid of all of it.
Every single grain of sand.
And I'm fully aware that this is just an us thing, and not everybody is going to be bothered by that. But if you have OCD in any capacity like we do, that is going to annoy the crap out of you.
That kind of can be said for the other room too, to be fair, but yeah.
Any room with sand, like in general.
I don't like sand.
Also, I can't believe we haven't touched on this yet. The Gust Bellows is such a cool item.
Yes.
It really is.
It really is.
So, yeah. This is when Skyward Sword dungeons really kick it up a notch, because the next portion of the game has back-to-back some of my favorites in the series, starting with the Ancient Cistern.
Ancient Cistern.
S tier. Easily.
S tier.
This has... I'm tempted to say this might have some of the best theming in the series, above even some of that of Twilight Princess.
Yeah.
Because not only is it really, really well designed tonally, just for the tone of the game and what kind of place this is supposed to be, but it's tied back to an actual real-world culture tidbit in a Buddhist story.
Yeah.
That is clever as hell. And such a random but cool idea that it's one of those things that once you've seen it done, you're kind of amazed that they've never pulled from anything like that before.
It's also one of those things where the dungeon is well designed on its own, and you could go through it never knowing that and still think it's really cool.
Yeah, because like
it becomes so much better.
Even not knowing the the source material. If anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, there's this Buddhist story called the Spider's Thread, and it's basically about this sinner who basically did everything wrong in his life except he spared a spider once. So Buddha was just like, alright, I'll let you out of hell, but you need to be a decent person. And he starts climbing the thread, and then other people start to climb it, and then he starts being selfish, so it snaps. And if you've played Skyward Sword, suddenly that's going to sound very familiar. But, my god, it's just... Moose, what the hell are you doing? Get off of there.
While he's
Moose.
dealing with Moose, I would also mention that Skyward Sword's water controls are also very good.
Excuse me for a moment. Moose? No. No. Dad, you don't eat that. You don't eat that. That's not food. You're gonna get sick if you do that. Don't. Paper is not edible, Moose. Okay, I'm back. He tried to eat paper. And he's moody, so whenever you tell him no, he gets mad.
But Ancient Cistern,
Also, one of the few examples of a water dungeon being genuinely fantastic.
yes, I was mentioning that as you
We're dealing
went
with
to take
Cat.
care of Moose. But, yeah, it helps that the water controls in Skyward Sword are really good.
Yeah, they're super smooth, super fluid. I love the spinny mechanic thingy. I don't know what the hell they call that. You know what I mean. You shake the thing and he does the boost.
What would you call that move?
I don't know. I just call it I've always called it the spinny. Because mentally I'm 5 and come up with dumb names for stuff. But, yeah. It's a great dungeon with fantastic theming and amazingly clever tie to real-world culture. And it's capped off by one of the best bosses in the series.
Oh, yeah.
Koloktos is one of the coolest frickin' boss fights. It's just so fun. It's thrilling, it's intimidating, it's entertaining, it's clever. The whip is what the grappling hook in Wind Waker should have been. There's nothing bad I can really say about the Ancient Cistern.
I also think the whip is really fun to use in this game because of the motion controls.
It really is. It just feels right. Everything about that feels correct. So, continuing the trend of Skyward Sword starting out decent and then getting better and better and better and better, we have the Sand Ship. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I actually like this place even more than the Ancient Cistern.
Yeah, I agree.
This place is so cool! I don't know how it took 2 games after Wind Waker for us to get a pirate ship themed dungeon.
Actually,
Well, I'm not counting the ghost ship.
okay.
I meant in the 3D games. But man, this is so cool. It's just simple idea, very simple idea. Pirate ship. That's already a cool idea for a dungeon. And then they, not only do they A, give you the bow, which as we've said many times is an automatic plus, but B, they take an idea that made an already fantastic dungeon earlier in the game and apply it to a dungeon that already has a sense of identity without that. They take the timeshift stones, which are what made Lenairu mining facility what it is, and then they apply it to a pirate ship. And it just works. It's so cool. I love the fact that, if I'm remembering correctly, there's only 1 or 2 timeshift stones on the entire ship.
Yeah.
And you have to shoot it from different rooms, out windows and out through ceilings and cracks in the wall. That's such a freaking clever idea, and it makes this place feel less like a collection of rooms and more like just a big interconnected location.
Yeah.
And that's something that very few Zelda dungeons do. Earth Temple is one that does it in Wind Waker. That's one that does it, but not to the extent the Sand Ship does. The Sand Ship does it better than any other dungeon in the series, easily. Because you have to interact with parts of other rooms while you're nowhere near that room. It's just such a cool idea, and it's pulled off so well. The mini-boss is so freaking cool. I love the pirate duel. Pirate skeleton duel. How do you not love that?
You don't not love that.
It's just such a cool, it's one of those things that's like, the inner child in you knows that this is just a very creative concept. And it's the kind of thing that you fantasize about on a playground when you're 5. It's that sense of imagination captured in one dungeon. On top of some ridiculously clever puzzles, some really, really good theming, and... Okay, I know this is an unpopular opinion, but I actually really like the boss.
Oh, Tenless?
Yeah. Yes, it looks like the offspring of Mike Wazowski and Celia from Monsters, Inc. Yes, I'm aware of that. The fight with it, however, is pretty cool. Also, I don't know if it's just the Shadow of the Colossus fan in me, but I really like fighting physically large bosses. And the idea of fighting something that is large and strong enough to, like, destroy the entire ship is just, there's something about that that's very thrilling to me.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, it's pretty... Moose, no. No. Down.
But yeah, Planny pretty much said everything I wanted to say. So, S tier.
Yeah, it's a really good dungeon.
Yeah.
It's basically... If the Lenairu mining facility had a better overall theme. It's the same things that make that dungeon so great, on top of additional things that just kind of pile up to make a fantastically memorable area.
This is just the Lenairu mining facility, an already great dungeon, but even better.
Yeah. And now we're at the Fire Sanctuary.
And this is where the game starts to dip.
Okay. I have numerous problems with this place. The first is that I know this really, it doesn't really impact my ranking here, but I have more reasons that we'll get to in a bit. But getting to this place is a slog. You have to get, what's his name? The little robot dude that carries stuff for you? Scrapper. Yeah, him.
I remember now.
You have to get him to carry the cauldron. Now do you know where... You know what I'm talking about now, right?
Now I remember.
Yeah. It's tedious.
I did such a good job blocking that out of my memory. No.
Yeah. Because you have to replay the dungeon to get that cauldron in the first place, and then not only do they bring that idea back, which is completely unnecessary, but they turn it into an escort mission. Why?
Necessary escort mission.
Look.
One that has no reason to
No
exist.
reason. And look, I love Skyward Sword, but my god, it is way too padded in some places. And this is one of the worst examples of that.
If you wanted to have an escort mission somewhere, there are ways to do that other than just drop to the bottom of the mountain for no reason instead of the summit.
Yep. So, yeah, there's that. So the build-up to this dungeon, right off the bat, isn't exactly great.
Kind of pessimistic going in.
The second thing, also pessimistic going in, keep in mind that, up until this point, you had been doing trials, right? The Sacred Realm trials, to give you special items that usually tie into what you're doing in the dungeon. There's stuff that is useful in the dungeon. All you get out of this one is fireproof earrings, which, in the grand scheme of things, changes nothing. The one before this gave you the double claw shots, and you're gonna follow that up with an upgrade that effectively does nothing other than eliminate a wall. That's basically all it does. It lets you go through, like, a room, and that's it. So that's already underwhelming. And then we get to the temple itself, and I want it to be worth it. I want it to be worth it so bad because there's just unnecessary padding and underwhelming things leading up to this dungeon, and then you get there, and it's another generic fire dungeon. There is, like, nothing separating this from the Earth Temple. You could show me rooms in the Fire Sanctuary and tell me that they were from the second dungeon in the game, and I would believe you. It looks almost exactly the same.
Yeah, honestly, when I ran out my tier list, I put it in C tier. I forgot about the build-up to all this, and I forgot pretty much everything about the dungeon itself.
That's the problem. The problem with this dungeon isn't the fact that the dungeon itself is bad. It's that it's basically rehashing tons of shit you've already seen before, not just in the series, but in the same damn game. There does not need to be 2 fire temples in this game. So why does this place exist? It doesn't need to. This is the most unnecessary dungeon in the series, and it adds, 7 hours to a game that don't need to happen.
That's kind of just Skyward Sword's problem. I like the game. Let me reiterate, we both
really like the game, but it is really padded. And the Fire Sanctuary is by far the worst example of this, because there is underwhelming build-up to shit you've already seen before.
It really feels like
and on top of that, if that wasn't bad enough, if you're not getting just another generic fire dungeon, they reuse a boss! You don't even get an interesting boss fight! It's just the same, it's the first boss again! With almost nothing different. The only difference is that he throws more knives at you, and he has 2 swords now. Other than that, the battle is exactly the same. There is nothing new introduced in this area. Nothing.
You know what? I'm actually gonna drop it to D tier now.
I'm putting it in F tier. This place doesn't need to exist. This is the only dungeon in the series that it's not necessarily that I dread getting to it. It's just that it has nothing going for it that every other dungeon in the series either does the same thing or does better. There's no reason for this place to exist. Lore-wise, there's no reason for it to exist. Why do you even go here? That should exemplify my point as well. I genuinely do not remember why I even have to come to this place. I know you're powering up the sword or some shit, but there are the other dungeons where you have to do that. There is a reason to go through a dungeon in order to do so. Like, for the Ancient Cistern, it's like an ancient shrine made to test the freaking hero. That's the point. It's like a relic, an ancient relic. And in the Sand Ship, you're trying to take back what was stolen from the natives of the land. You're doing a favor for the people that lived here. This place, it's just there.
You're getting really heated about this.
Because I honest to God, I can't think of anything positive to say about this place. It just exists for no reason.
I can't think of anything good about it either.
This wouldn't bother me as much if we didn't already have a fire dungeon in this game. The second dungeon in the game was already a fire dungeon, and this place is so similar to it, to the point where it's not only in the same location, but I genuinely struggle to differentiate what happens between the two.
The only actually semi-positive thing, and your mileage may vary on this one, maybe it could be seen as an extension of the Earth Temple, and I think that would be kind of cool. But
I guess, but at the same time, why does it need to be an extension? It's just there for no reason.
Really, it feels like this part of the game could have been taken out, and
you could literally have removed this entire saga from the game of the escort mission up the mountain, the Silent Realm trial, which gets you nothing but a glorified key. And then this dungeon, which is basically a rehash of a theme you've already seen before, and nothing new added to the table. Look, I love the shit out of Skyward Sword, but this game is too goddamn long for its own good, and this section of the game adds a good 5 or so hours that don't need to exist.
Yeah, I kind of see why you would put it in F tier now. I don't think it's quite that bad.
That's the thing, though. That's what really bothers me about this place so much, is that not only is it unnecessary, but it's not like the water temple where, like, it's bad and worth talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if people forget this part of the game completely forgot existed. Earlier, you said that you would completely block that part of the game out of your memory. That's kind of my point. Like, I wouldn't blame you if you forgot this entire dungeon exists.
I remember it existed, but that's all I remember. It exists.
Exactly.
It is.
Exactly. It's just there. There's nothing worth talking about with it. It's just there. At least with the water temple, you could have some interesting conversations with people about how frustrating you found it, or how you think maybe it's overhated, or something worth starting a conversation over. This place is just boring. There's nothing there.
I should have rewatched this part of Chugga's Let's Play before we started this. Then I might have something interesting to say about it.
Yeah, nothing stands out. Other than the fact that that was really fucking pointless.
Want to move on?
Yeah, let's.
Skykeep.
Okay, people have some mixed opinions about this place. How do you feel about it?
I actually don't remember much about Skykeep. I remember this one puzzle where you have to rearrange some blocks in like a slide puzzle kind of thing. That's about it.
Okay, honestly, okay, this might be a hot take. I actually don't know. I'm putting it in A.
A?
Yeah. Cause here's the thing. You're right. I remember that slide block puzzle, but do you remember what it does? Because that's what makes this place cool.
Oh, now I remember.
It moves the entire dungeon.
It rearranges the dungeon, yes!
It's such a cool idea for a dungeon because the puzzle is the dungeon.
Okay, actually now that you mention that, that is really cool.
Most Zelda games, and you go into a dungeon, you're like, oh, I expect to solve some puzzles. No, this time the dungeon is the puzzle. And that, by itself, is just such a creative concept. I can't help but love it. I also love just how much freedom you have in this place. You can kind of handle it however you want. It's not linear. It's not like other Zelda dungeons where it's like, oh, get item, get the boss key, go fight boss. No, you can get the Triforce shards in any order you want. There's some limitations, but for the most part, you can arrange it however the hell you feel like it. And the fact that there's multiple right ways to do it, but it's not open-ended enough that you can solve it by accident. You do have to think about it, but you can kind of put your own spin on it, and it makes it different every time. I don't think I've ever played through the Skykeep the same way twice. Like going from room to room in a set order, I never do that. It's always a little bit different every time. And that alone is pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of those dungeons where like the rooms themselves, it kind of like the sand ship, where like the rooms themselves aren't what make the dungeon special. It's the overall bigger picture of how it's all tied together that makes it really interesting. And while I don't think it's quite as good as the sand ship, because it doesn't have as good theming, it is kind of all over the place. You're sliding the rooms around in a slide block puzzle. That's pretty freaking creative.
Yeah.
There's not really much else I have to say about it. It's just a really neat idea. A really neat idea that's handled decently well. Not handled in a way that's mind-blowing, but handled in a way that I think is pretty damn fun.
I do also really like how this is sort of just lifted from that one area in Barren Woods, and how when you finish the dungeon, it sinks back to Hyrule.
That's also really freaking cool. Like the island falling. It's like the dungeon itself gives you a lot of world building. It's really interesting.
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna say A for this too.
Yeah. This is a pretty neat dungeon. I know, I feel like I've heard people complain about this, but I don't remember where, because it is kind of rehashing like older dungeon tropes, but I don't know, the concept of it is just so original, and it's just so unique that I can't help but love it.
Yeah, I think I have heard people complain about Skykeep, but Honestly, yeah, now that you bring it up, I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Nothing super spectacular, but the idea of the Skykeep is one that I can really get behind.